which nutritional interventions to improve cognitive function have the most science backing their efficacy and safety?
Well, in terms of memory, I think ginkgo biloba and brahmi are probably the two that have the strongest evidence. None of them, in my view, on reading the evidence, there may be a few recent papers that I might not be familiar with, but from my reading of the literature, there aren't any that really have an acute impact. So, if you just take a heavy dose immediately, it doesn't have a benefit. Mm-hmm. The only sorts of substances that do that are stimulants, so like caffeine, which really just sort of maybe improves your alertness and influences the way you encode information. So it's sort of peripheral to memory in a way, in that it's not really having an impact on the storage of the information in your memory, but it's probably allowing you to maintain your concentration and encode the information better in a way in that case. Right. Glucose can have an effect. So there are studies where supplementing or giving somebody a dose of glucose will improve function. Though the studies that show an effect of that tend to be the ones, though, where people have actually been not eating, so they've been fasting for some period of hours before the study, so that in a way it might be more just that dose of glucose is returning the body to its more normal functioning level. So I think there are some studies that maybe show a bit of a boost. But again, that's sort of just, in relation to things like glucose and the stimulants, but there's not really that improved memory as such from a single dose, or there's not very many studies and not enough to be convincing at this point for me.
Right.
There are other studies, though, suggesting long-term effects. So I've already mentioned ginkgo and brahmi, obviously. I've been involved in some nutritional research with my colleagues here, and we've been looking at a group of chemicals called anthocyanins, which are the chemicals that give fruits and vegetables their dark purple and red pigments. So they're quite common in strawberries and blueberries and some of the dark-fleshed plums, and a few other things. And there's a few papers out there now suggesting a benefit from dietary supplementation with anthocyanins, taking, consuming, reasonably large quantities of those sorts of things, of berries.
Right.
So the studies we've been doing have been, drinking 200 mils of juice, for example, every day. Some of the studies that have been done in animals, so again in rats, that have shown positive effects have, been giving the rat an equivalent of something like asking a human to eat, a whole punnet of strawberries or a whole punnet of blueberries every day.
Right.
So, those ones are also, I think, showing potential for some benefit as a long-term supplement. But, it's difficult, of course, because those things are seasonal. They're relatively expensive. Processing can destroy those chemicals. So if the food being processed, so if it's being stored, if it's being turned into a juice or something like that, the industrial processes on those can actually destroy the chemicals. and make it so that really there's none of that chemical still active or available in the substance.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of work still to be done in trying to work out how foods can be used other than through fresh foods.
Right. I know there are extracts of blueberries, for example, containing standardized amounts of anthocyanins.
Yes, yeah. So there are people who are working on and have developed, I think, means of, as you say, extracting without destroying the anthocyanin. My understanding from my colleagues in nutrition is that the sort of heat processes that are generally applied to foods destroy the anthocyanin, and there's then no benefit from consuming it.
Right.
So companies are aware of that and are working on ways of preserving it, and extracting it in a way that's going to still be available within the supplement.
Right. You mentioned caffeine and glucose for acute cognitive enhancement earlier.
Yep.
In my experience, both of those have negative effects if I use them consistently. So if I drink several cups of coffee in a day, every day, then I build tolerance and perform worse at baseline, for example. Yeah,
absolutely. That's the pattern with many drugs is tolerance. So you get a reduced effect.
Yeah.
The more often you take it, the smaller the benefit becomes, and so people take more and more of it. And then, of course, even with you get the standard idea of drug withdrawal, you get that with caffeine as well. So people who've been drinking something like 8 cups of coffee a day, if they stop taking caffeine, will feel pretty terrible and may suffer headaches and other sorts of problems. And many of those things seem to be that they sort of induce a subjective improvement, and then of course that declines as the drug wears off. But that subjective improvement might actually just be, taking you back up to what would be your normal level if you weren't using it.
Right.
So once you've become a habitual sort of user, it might be more that that substance is actually just effectively getting you out of the slump from when you're not dosed up on the caffeine. I've seen studies that suggest that that's the case with nicotine with smokers, that really what's happening when they're smoking is just that it's removing the craving and bringing their system back up to a more normal level of functioning, rather than giving them a boost to their function over and above what you might think of as a normal level.
Right. You mentioned long-term neurogenesis in the hippocampus earlier. Of Bacopa Monnieri. That is not a mechanism that is happening in nicotine, caffeine, and glucose, right?
No, absolutely, yeah. No, so those sorts of things are having short-term effects on neurotransmitter levels and things like that, rather than more chronic effects related to you might say the structure of the brain. I suppose if you're talking about neurogenesis, you're adding new neurons and they're making new connections, and you're changing the function of your brain.
Right.
You're allowing it to function in a better way.
Right. Would it be reasonable to assume that herbs that do improve hippocampal neurogenesis and increase it, that you don't build tolerance to them, and I guess specifically Bacopa Monnieri?
Well, again, that's a really interesting question when you start thinking about the human body and the diversity and the complexity of the interactions that are going on, and that the human body is, a set of homeostatic mechanisms. So when you start increasing the levels of availability of one substance, it may actually trigger a process that acts to reduce the levels of that substance in your bloodstream. Right. So it may be that you can get some benefit initially, but it may be that benefit declines over time. It may be that for some people that homeostatic mechanism works particularly efficiently and removes excess amounts of those chemicals or those metabolites, etc., from the bloodstream before they really manage to do any good. So it's all very complex, and difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen for anybody in particular.
Right. And I think it's great that there is so much new research coming out on all of these underlying mechanisms of how the body absorbs and distributes drugs and how they bind to different receptors.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge research going on. It's all very complicated and difficult to get your head around all of it and stay on top of it.
Right. Is there any specific research that is exciting to you that's ongoing or is going to happen?
I wouldn't say anything particularly that I'm excited about. I guess I'm a little bit skeptical about the benefits for people who are well nourished and healthy. Most of the studies where you're seeing effects tend to be in groups, like as we said before, older people who've got declining function.
Right.
You might be able to improve that, or groups who've got deficits of some type. So for example, we know and have known for many decades, right, that iodine deficiency results in a lack of development in parts of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a nutrient deficiency. But if people have a normal level of iodine in their blood and you supplement them with iodine, it doesn't result in even better, development of the brain.
Right.
And again, it's one of those sort of homeostatic mechanisms, I think, that the body sort of removes the excess of what it doesn't need of these things. Right. So I think for a lot of the research, and it's not clear also, like with the reporting about subjects or people who are participating in these studies, there's often no reporting around what their ordinary diet is like.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they live in, most of them are obviously done in Western societies where the population's relatively well nourished. But even within Western societies, we have a clear thing about people not eating enough fruit and vegetables, and so they're not getting enough of the micronutrients. So it might be that some of these effects that we're seeing are really because some people in the particular samples who are taking part are, a bit deficient in their diet, and really that this is just sort of helping to bring them up to a more optimal level, which would be obtained if they just ate a healthy diet anyway.
Right.
So, without that information, it's hard to say. But basically, I think there's a lot more research needs to be done before we can really be confident about any of these things having a notably positive effect on, memory function.
Right.
I know you talk in your blog about, things like healthy lifestyle effectively, getting good nutrition, getting enough sleep, getting
Right.
exercise, being physically healthy and so on, right?
Yeah.
So all of those things are important. And, it may be that the benefits we see from supplements are going to be more beneficial to people who haven't got that sort of healthy lifestyle, and that there are processes that are not working in the way that they're meant to or at their optimum level as a result of those lifestyle factors.
Right.
It's those people maybe who are going to show benefits from supplementation.